They told me I was getting nothing, and I believed them for 23 years. Until the lawyer called and changed everything, though not in the way you think. My grandmother Patricia, who everyone called Patty, died on a Tuesday. I found out on a Friday through Facebook, of all places. My cousin Derek posted some generic rest in peace thing with a blurry photo from 1987. Nobody called me, nobody texted me. I was just another ghost in the family tree. See, my family had this thing where they loved to remind me how much of a disappointment I was. Dad, Gary, would say it straight to my face. "You're just like your mother," meaning my biological mother, Sarah, who left when I was 5. Mom, Linda, the woman who married Gary when I was 7, would just nod along like, "Yeah, that kid is definitely broken." My sister Jessica, who was Linda's real daughter, got everything: new clothes for school, trips to the mall, driving lessons at 16. I got hand-me-downs and lectures about being grateful. I moved out the day I turned 18 with $300 from my part-time job at the grocery store and a duffel bag full of clothes that didn't fit right. I rented a room in a house with 4 other guys, all of us working dead-end jobs, splitting utilities, and pretending we had our lives together. I worked at Best Buy selling electronics to people who knew more about tech than I did, then moved to a warehouse, then to another warehouse, because apparently that's what people like me do. 5 years of barely keeping my head above water, living paycheck to paycheck, eating ramen and peanut butter sandwiches, and watching my high school friends get married, buy houses, and start families while I was still figuring out how to afford car insurance. My family would post pictures on social media, big family dinners at holidays, Jessica's graduation from college, Gary's promotion at the bank, Linda's new kitchen renovation. I wasn't in any of those pictures because I wasn't invited. The thing about being the family outcast is you start to believe you deserve it. Maybe Gary was right. Maybe I was just like my biological mother. Maybe I was destined to be a disappointment who couldn't keep a job or a relationship or even a clean apartment. I dated here and there, but nothing serious. Because how do you explain to someone that your family pretends you don't exist? That you haven't spoken to your sister in 3 years? That your stepmom blocks you on Instagram? When I was 25, I finally got a decent job at a small marketing company. Nothing fancy, just answering phones and filing paperwork, but it had benefits and paid enough that I could afford my own studio apartment in a complex that wasn't falling apart. My boss, Rachel, was this 40-something woman who treated me like I actually mattered, gave me more responsibilities when I proved I could handle them, and even covered for me when I had to miss work because my car broke down again. That's when I started therapy, because Rachel mentioned offhandedly that the company had mental health benefits, and maybe I should use them. First session, I just sat there for 45 minutes while Dr. Martinez waited for me to say something. Anything. Finally, she asked what brought me there, and I said, "I think my family broke me." She nodded like that was the most normal thing in the world and said, "Okay, let's talk about that." It took me 6 months to tell her about the Gary threw my birthday cake in the garbage when I was 12 because I forgot to take out the trash, about Linda giving away my pet hamster while I was at school because it was making too much noise, about Jessica telling everyone at her Sweet 16 that I wasn't really her brother, just some random kid her mom had to deal with. Dr. Martinez listened, took notes, and never once acted like I was crazy for feeling hurt by these things. Year 7 of therapy, I was doing better. I had a promotion at work, my own 1-bedroom apartment, and a car that actually started every morning. I even went on a few dates with a woman from my complex. Nothing serious, but she laughed at my jokes and didn't seem to think I was completely hopeless. I was considering reaching out to Jessica, maybe trying to fix things, when Derek's Facebook post showed up. Patty had been in the hospital for 2 weeks. None of them thought to mention it. She died alone. Well, not alone. Linda was there, but you know what I mean. I wasn't there. Nobody expected me to be there because I was nobody. The funeral was the following Tuesday. I didn't go. Obviously wasn't invited anyway. But I did drive by the cemetery later, just sat in my car looking at all the flowers and wondering if things could have been different. That Friday I was at work when my phone rang. Unknown number. I almost didn't answer because who calls anyone anymore? But something made me pick up. The voice on the other end said, "This is James Peterson from Peterson and Associates. We represent the estate of Patricia Williams. I need to schedule a meeting with you regarding her will." I laughed, not because it was funny, but because it was absurd. I told him he had the wrong person. Patty wouldn't leave me anything. She barely knew I existed. He insisted, said he had my current address, my phone number, my social security number. Could I please come in Monday at 2? I spent the weekend convinced it was some kind of scam, or maybe a cruel joke Gary had set up to mess with me one last time. Monday came, and I drove to the lawyer's office downtown, still half expecting to be turned away at the door. But the receptionist knew my name, had me sit in a fancy waiting room with leather chairs and magazines about golf. James Peterson looked exactly like what you'd expect from a lawyer. Probably 50-something, gray hair, expensive suit. The kind of guy who charges $300 an hour to tell you things you already know. He had a folder on his desk with my name on it, which was weird because I hadn't existed to my family for years. He started with the basics. Patty had died intestate, meaning without a will. Wait, no, that wasn't right. She had a will, just not the one everyone expected. Apparently she'd had 2 wills. The one everyone knew about from 1998 that left everything to Gary and Linda equally, and another one from 6 months ago that changed everything. The new will left me her house. Not just any house, but the house. The 4-bedroom colonial where Gary grew up, where family dinners happened, where Christmas morning played out every year for decades. Worth probably $400,000, maybe more in today's market. Plus, there was a savings account with $60,000 and instructions that I was to receive all of her personal belongings before anyone else could go through them. I asked Peterson if this was legal, if Gary could contest it. He said, sure, anyone can contest a will, but this one was rock solid. Patty had been of sound mind, had witnesses, had everything notarized. She'd even included a letter explaining her decision, which Peterson handed me in a sealed envelope, told me to read it later when I was alone. I drove home in a daze, couldn't process what was happening. The family that had spent 20 years treating me like garbage was about to find out that the black sheep inherited the crown jewel. Patty's house wasn't just valuable. It was symbolic. The heart of the family. The place where Gary expected to retire, where Linda had probably already planned Jessica's wedding reception. That evening, I opened Patty's letter, sitting on my couch with a beer. I rarely drank because alcohol made me think too much about things I wanted to forget. Her handwriting was shaky but clear. She wrote that she'd been watching me from a distance, knew about my job, my apartment, my therapy sessions. Apparently, Linda had been feeding her information over the years, thinking she was just making conversation. Patty wrote that she was proud of me for building a life despite everything Gary had put me through. That she'd never forgotten how I used to help her in the garden when I was little, before Gary decided I was too much trouble to have around holidays. She said the house should go to someone who understood what it meant to work for things, to appreciate what you have, not to someone who expected everything to be handed to them. The letter explained that she'd tried to include me in family events over the years, but Gary had made it clear I wasn't welcome. Linda went along with it because she didn't want to cause problems. Jessica probably didn't even know I existed half the time because they'd done such a good job erasing me from family stories. Patty said she was sorry for not standing up to them sooner, but she was fixing it now the only way she knew how. I called Dr. Martinez, left a voicemail because this felt too big to handle alone. Spent the next 3 days going to work pretending everything was normal while internally freaking out about what would happen when Gary found out. Tuesday morning, Peterson called, said he'd contacted the family to inform them about the will reading scheduled for Thursday at 10. Wednesday night, Gary called my number. I don't know how he got it, hadn't heard his voice in 3 years. Hey, sport, he said like we talked every week. Heard there's been some confusion about Mom's will. Probably just a mistake, but we should clear it up before this gets out of hand. I didn't say anything, just listened to him try to charm his way through what was obviously panic. He said the family was worried about me, that inheriting property was a big responsibility. Maybe it would be easier if I just signed everything over to them. They'd make sure I got a fair cut, of course. Just enough to help me out, but not so much that I'd be overwhelmed by taxes and maintenance. I told him I'd see him Thursday and hung up. Thursday morning, I put on my best shirt, the one I wore to job interviews, and drove to Peterson's office. My hands were shaking so bad I could barely hold the steering wheel. I kept thinking about all the times Gary had called me useless, all the family photos I wasn't in, all the birthday parties and graduations and holidays where I was persona non grata. The whole family was there. Gary, looking older and grayer than I remembered. Linda, in one of those church dresses she wore when she wanted to look respectable. Jessica, with her husband Brad, who I'd never met. Derek and his wife Sarah, even a few cousins I barely knew. Everyone dressed in black, like they were still mourning, except they weren't mourning Patty. They were mourning what they thought was their inheritance. Peterson read the will out loud, every word, while I watched their faces change from confusion to disbelief to barely controlled rage. Gary kept shaking his head like he could make the words different. Linda was crying, but the angry kind of crying. Jessica looked at me like she was seeing me for the first time in years, trying to figure out how this had happened. When Peterson finished reading, there was silence. Then Gary exploded, said this was fraud, that his mother would never do this, that I must have manipulated her somehow. Peterson calmly explained that Patty had been evaluated by 2 doctors. Both confirmed she was mentally competent when she made the changes. Linda tried a different approach, started talking about family loyalty, about how Patty would want us all to stick together, how maybe we could work something out that made everyone happy. Jessica just stared at me like I was a stranger, which I guess I was. Derek muttered something about blood being thicker than water, while his wife elbowed him to shut up. I let them talk, let them rage and bargain, and try to guilt me into giving up what Patty left me. Then I stood up and said the only thing that mattered. I thanked Peterson, shook his hand, and walked out. They followed me to the parking lot, Gary shouting about how this wasn't over, how family takes care of family, Linda begging me to think about what Patty would really want, Jessica asking if I even remembered being part of this family. I drove straight to the house, used the key Peterson had given me, and walked through rooms I remembered from childhood, before Gary decided I was too much trouble. The kitchen, where Patty taught me to make cookies. The living room, where we watched game shows. The garden, where I helped her plant tomatoes that never grew quite right because the soil was too sandy. Every room had memories. They weren't all bad ones either. I remembered birthday parties before Gary remarried, Christmas mornings when it was just me and him and Patty, before Linda and Jessica came along and changed everything. I remembered feeling like I belonged somewhere. That was before I learned belonging was conditional, that love could be taken away if you didn't measure up. I called Rachel, told her I needed a few days off, had some family stuff to deal with. She said take all the time I needed and asked if everything was okay. I said it was complicated, which was the understatement of the year. I called Dr. Martinez too, scheduled an emergency session because I was spiraling between anger and guilt and this weird feeling like I'd won a game I didn't know I was playing. That night, I slept in Patty's house for the first time in 15 years, in the guest room because sleeping in her bedroom felt wrong, too final. The house was exactly like I remembered. Floral wallpaper in the kitchen, ceramic figurines on every surface, pictures of family covering the mantel, including some of me from when I was little, before I became invisible. Gary showed up the next morning, didn't knock, just used his key like he still lived there. He found me in the kitchen drinking coffee from one of Patty's cups, the ones with roses on them. He looked tired, defeated, like he'd been up all night trying to figure out how this had happened, which he probably had. We sat at the kitchen table, the same one where I used to do homework while Patty cooked dinner, where Gary used to lecture me about my grades, my attitude, my future. He asked why I thought his mother had done this, what I'd said to her to make her change her mind. I told him the truth. I hadn't spoken to Patty in over 2 years. I had no idea she was even thinking about me. He didn't believe me, kept pushing, kept asking what my angle was, what I wanted from all this, like I'd planned it somehow. Finally, I asked him the question that had been burning in my chest for 20 years. I asked why he'd decided I wasn't worth loving anymore, why everything changed when Linda came along. Gary got quiet, then looked at his hands. Said it wasn't like that, said I was a difficult kid, that Linda had Jessica to think about, that it was easier to focus on the kids who weren't causing problems. I asked what problems I'd caused at 7 years old, what terrible things I'd done to deserve being pushed out of my own family. He didn't have an answer. Linda showed up while we were talking, let herself in through the back door, like she'd done 1,000 times. She used her fake sweet voice, the one she used when she wanted something, said we needed to discuss this like adults, like a family. I laughed because it was rich, her talking about family now after years of making sure I knew I didn't belong. She had a proposal. They'd buy the house from me at fair market value. I could keep the savings account and some of Patty's jewelry. The family stuff, she said, trying to make it sound generous, like they were doing me a favor. I asked what made her think I wanted to sell. She said a house like this was a lot of responsibility for someone in my situation, meaning someone like me, someone who'd never owned anything worth more than my car. Jessica showed up that afternoon with Brad, her husband, who looked uncomfortable, like he'd been dragged into family drama he didn't understand. Jessica had always been pretty, but now she looked tired, stressed, like maybe her perfect life wasn't as perfect as social media made it seem. She asked if we could talk alone and sent Brad to wait in the car. We sat in the living room where we used to watch cartoons on Saturday mornings before everything went wrong. She asked if I remembered being kids together, playing in the backyard, building blanket forts. I said I remembered. She said she'd missed me, that she'd wanted to reach out over the years but didn't know how. I asked her why she never stood up for me, why she let Gary and Linda erase me from family pictures, family stories, family life. She cried, real tears, not the manipulation kind, said she was just a kid too, that she didn't understand what was happening until it was too late, that by the time she was old enough to see how wrong it was, I was already gone. We talked for 2 hours about things we should have talked about years ago, about how Gary played favorites, how Linda never tried to include me, how Jessica felt guilty for getting the love and attention that should have been shared. She asked what it would take for me to give the house back to the family where it belonged. I told her the house was exactly where it belonged. Patty had made her choice for her own reasons, and I wasn't going to undo the one thing she'd ever done to show me I mattered. Jessica said I was being selfish, that the house had been in the family for generations, that Gary had grown up there, had planned to retire there. I said Gary had made his choice too, when he decided I wasn't really family, when he chose Linda's comfort over his son's well-being, when he let me walk away at 18 without a fight. Jessica said that was different, that Gary was doing his best, that blended families were complicated. I said some things are only complicated if you want them to be. The calls started that weekend, every few hours from different family members trying different approaches. Derek tried the cousin angle, talking about how we used to be close when we were kids, how families should stick together. His wife got on the phone, said they were struggling financially, could really use help with their mortgage. Linda's sister called, someone I'd met maybe twice in my life. She said she'd heard about the situation, thought maybe a neutral party could help mediate, asked if I'd considered what Patty would really want, knowing how much the house meant to Gary. I even got a call from the pastor at their church, a guy I'd never met, who wanted to discuss forgiveness and Christian values. I blocked most of their numbers after the first week, but they kept finding new ways to reach me. Showed up at my apartment, at my job, left notes on my car windshield. Gary even tried to get Rachel to convince me to be reasonable. Told her I was making a mistake that would hurt the whole family. Rachel told him to leave or she'd call security. I moved into Patty's house after that, partly because I was tired of them harassing me at my apartment, partly because I wanted to understand why she'd left it to me. The house was full of her life, photo albums dating back decades, recipes written in her shaky handwriting, books with bookmarks still in them, like she'd planned to finish reading them. I found a box in her closet with my name on it, full of things I'd forgotten I'd made for her in elementary school. Art projects, Mother's Day cards, a story I'd written in 3rd grade about a boy who lived with his grandmother because she was the only one who understood him. There were newspaper clippings, too. My high school graduation announcement, a photo of me from when I worked at Best Buy, looking young and hopeful. At the bottom of the box was another letter, dated just a month before she died. She wrote that she'd been thinking about me constantly, wondering if I was happy, if I'd found people who appreciated me. She said she regretted not fighting harder for me when I was young, not standing up to Gary when he started pushing me out. She wrote that the house was my inheritance, but also my choice, that I could sell it, keep it, or burn it down if that's what would make me happy. The only thing that mattered was that I knew someone in the family had seen my worth, had believed I deserved good things, had loved me even when I thought no one did. Reading that letter in her bedroom, surrounded by her things, I finally understood this wasn't just about money or property or even revenge. This was about validation, about finally having someone in my family choose me over everyone else, even if she had to die to do it. The legal stuff took months. Peterson handled most of it, but there were papers to sign, inspections to schedule, tax implications to figure out. Gary contested the will like Peterson said he would, hired his own lawyer, tried to prove Patty wasn't competent when she made the changes. But her doctors were solid, her witnesses credible, and his case fell apart pretty quickly. During those months, I kept living in the house, kept going to work, kept seeing Dr. Martinez, who said this was probably the healthiest I'd ever been, that having my worth validated, even posthumously, was helping me process years of feeling unwanted. The house started to feel like home in a way my apartment never had. Jessica kept trying to reach me, sending texts about family holidays, about how much everyone missed me, about how we could work through this if I just came to Sunday dinner, gave the house back, acted like the loving nephew and brother they remembered. I never responded, because that person had never existed. I'd always been the problem, the disappointment, the one who didn't fit. 6 months after Patty died, Gary showed up one last time, not angry this time, just defeated. He looked around the house at the changes I'd made, the new paint in the kitchen, the garden I'd started in the backyard. He said it looked good, said Patty would have liked what I'd done with the place. He asked if I was happy here, if this was really what I wanted. I said it was. He nodded, said he'd been thinking about things, about mistakes he'd made, about how maybe he'd been too hard on me growing up. Said Linda had been after him to apologize, to try to fix things between us. I asked if he was apologizing because he meant it or because he wanted something. He thought for a long time, then said probably both, that he did regret how things had gone, but also that losing the house felt like losing his mother all over again, losing his history, his future, his sense of what family meant. I told him I understood about loss, about feeling like you'd been erased from your own story, that I'd felt that way for 20 years, and maybe now he knew what it was like. He got angry, said it wasn't the same, that I'd chosen to walk away, that I'd refused to fit in. I said fitting in shouldn't require disappearing. We talked until it got dark, sitting in Patty's living room, 2 men who shared DNA and not much else. He left without asking for the house back, without making threats or promises to do better. Just said he hoped I'd be happy here, that maybe someday we could figure out how to be family again. I said maybe, but probably not. 5 years have passed since Patty died, and I'm still here in the house that became my house. Still going to therapy, still working at the marketing company, though I got promoted twice and now manage a small team. Still single but not lonely the way I used to be. When you know someone loved you enough to change their will, it changes how you see yourself. The family drama settled down eventually. Gary and Linda moved to a smaller place closer to Jessica. They seem okay from what I can tell through social media. Jessica had another baby, posts pictures of family gatherings where I'm obviously not invited, but it doesn't hurt the way it used to. When you've made peace with being unwanted, you stop needing to be wanted. Derek still sends friend requests on Facebook every few months, like he forgets I exist until he needs something. His wife left him, apparently. Took half of everything, including the house they couldn't afford even with his inheritance share, which wasn't as much as they'd expected once lawyer fees and taxes came out. Turns out, Patty's estate wasn't as valuable as everyone thought, except for the house. I've thought about selling it, moving somewhere completely new, starting fresh where nobody knows about family drama or inheritance fights or 20-year grudges. But this house has become more than just a place to live. It's proof that I survived, that I built something good out of something painful, that I'm worth more than my family ever believed. Last month, I was cleaning the attic and found more boxes of Patty's things, including a journal she kept during her last year. The entries about me were heartbreaking. She wrote about wanting to reach out, about regretting not standing up to Gary, about hoping I was okay somewhere out there, building a life that made me happy. She wrote about the day she decided to change her will, how she'd been watching Jessica's wedding photos on Facebook and realized I wasn't in any of them, wasn't even mentioned in the family group chat about wedding planning. She wrote that it broke her heart to see how completely they'd erased me, that she had to do something to show me I'd always mattered. Reading those journal entries, I finally understood that the inheritance wasn't about punishing Gary or Linda or Jessica. It was about healing something that had been broken for decades. It was about making sure that somewhere in the family story there was evidence that I'd existed, that I'd been loved, that my life had meaning. The house is different now than when Patty lived here, but it still carries her love. In the walls, in the garden she planted, in the recipes taped inside kitchen cabinets. I've added my own touches, a home office where I work sometimes, a workshop in the garage where I fix things that break instead of throwing them away. Sometimes I imagine what would have happened if Gary had been different, if Linda had tried harder to include me, if Jessica had stood up for me when we were kids. Would we be close now? Would I have given up the house to keep the family together? Probably, but that's not the story we got to live. Our story is messier, more complicated, full of choices that seemed small at the time but added up to this moment. Me sitting in a house that represents everything my family never thought I deserved, writing checks from an account they never thought I'd have, living a life they said I'd never be capable of building. The therapist says I've come a long way from the broken young man who walked into her office 7 years ago. That I've learned to value myself instead of waiting for others to do it. The inheritance was just the external validation of something I'd already started to believe internally, that I was worth more than how they treated me. I still don't talk to them, still don't get invited to family events, still see their lives play out on social media like a TV show about people I used to know. Gary looks older now, more tired. Linda posts inspirational quotes about family and forgiveness. Jessica's kids are growing up without knowing they have an uncle somewhere who thinks about them sometimes. But here's what I've learned about inheritance. It's not just about money or property or who gets what when someone dies. It's about what gets passed down, the stories, the beliefs, the patterns. My family passed down the belief that love was conditional, that belonging had to be earned, that some people were worth more than others. Patty passed down something different. She passed down the belief that I mattered, that my story was worth preserving, that someone in the family tree should remember my name with love instead of disappointment. Her will wasn't just a legal document. It was a love letter written in lawyer language that said, "You belong somewhere, even if that somewhere isn't where you started. The house will need a new roof soon, and the furnace makes noises that probably aren't good. I could sell it, take the money, and move somewhere warmer, cheaper, easier, but I won't. This house is my inheritance in every sense of the word, not just the building and the land, but the love that came with it, the validation, the proof that I was seen and valued and chosen." Sometimes, late at night, I walk through these rooms and think about all the lives that played out here. Gary's childhood, Jessica's visits, Patty's quiet years after Grandpa died, and now my life. The unexpected chapter where the family disappointment gets the happy ending. Where love wins, even when it comes too late to fix everything that was broken. That's the thing about inheritance, though. It's not about timing, it's about recognition. It's about someone, somewhere, deciding that your story matters enough to be continued, that your life has value that deserves to be acknowledged, that love doesn't always look like what you expect, but when it shows up, you hold on to it with both hands and you don't let go. The inheritance changed everything, but not in the way my family thought it would. They thought it would make me rich or happy, or grateful enough to come crawling back. Instead, it made me free. Free from needing their approval, free from believing their version of who I was, free to build a life that makes sense to me instead of one that makes sense to them. And maybe that's the real inheritance, not the house or the money or even the validation, but the freedom to finally stop trying to earn love from people who were never going to give it. The freedom to build something new, something better, something that honors the person who saw my worth when I couldn't see it myself. Patty's gone, but her love remains. In every choice I make to treat myself with kindness, in every decision to build instead of destroy, in every moment I choose to believe I'm worth the good things that happen to me. Her inheritance wasn't just material, it was spiritual. It was the gift of finally coming home to myself in a house where someone wanted me to stay.